to have you here with us to celebrate the indelible life of Enzo. You tell I'm a teacher, I'm waiting for everyone to be quiet. Finding words to describe my father feels like a tender act of harvest, carefully selecting only the finest, juiciest grapes to make a rich wine of remembrance. And remembering was something Enzo did so well. Many years ago, on a car ride to Toronto, just the two of us, I had dozed off in the passenger seat next to him, and when I woke, I apologized for being a boring co-pilot. He laughed at me and said, "Giulia, I'm never bored. I have 50 years of memories to replay in my mind." That was Enzo. To me, and to many others, his life was like a movie. And apparently it was for him, too. He was like a time traveler, someone who had touched the past and returned to tell the stories. He often described his childhood in Mamula as medieval. As a toddler, his mother dressed him in the robes of Sant Antonio to cure him of his asthma. She used cobwebs to mend cuts on his skin. Their running water came from a public fountain in the piazza. Perhaps this foot in the past is what drew him to literature. Enzo loved the classics from an early age. 2 weeks before he passed, he recited the opening stanza of Homer's The Odyssey for me in Italian. He learned it in 8th grade. So eager was he to learn that after grade 5, when his town's educational opportunities had been exhausted, he spent 3 years traveling back and forth to the nearby town of Gioiosa so he could continue his schooling. Sometimes when he was running late for the 6:40 a.m. bus, he would grab a handful of olives and shove them in his pocket to eat with a biscotto for breakfast along the way. At age 17, Enzo embarked on his own odyssey. Along with his brother Eugenio and zio Mecuzzo, he boarded a ship, the Saturnia, bound for Halifax, Nova Scotia. They spent Christmas on the boat. 10 days later, their Mediterranean skin felt the icy winds of Canada for the first time. Settling in Toronto with his family reunited, he doggedly pursued his education, taking evening classes after working long days in a woodworking factory. This, and voraciously reading novels, was how he learned English. Outside of work and study, Enzo took to living in a new country with the exhilaration of an early explorer. He reveled in walking the city and riding streetcars around Toronto and thrilled in adventuring the Canadian wilderness. In nature, in particular, he found a reflection of his soul. He was a careful observer of life and a deep appreciator of its beauty. This is why he knew he'd found the one when he met my mother, Maria. While on a visit to see relatives in Pittsburgh, his intuitive comare and compare invited my mom to dinner to meet their handsome Italian import. After 6 months, dozens of letters, and many road trips back and forth to Pittsburgh, Enzo and Maria were engaged. What followed was a love story that lasted 47 years here on Earth, but it's written forever in the stars. Their life together was filled with laughter and music, family and friends, good food, travel, and delights in the simplest pleasures. Truly, la dolce vita. They raised me and Mike in the happiest home any kids could ask for, and they modeled kindness and generosity beyond measure. Later, when we both married, they welcomed our spouses into the family with warm embrace Dad was especially happy he'd found a winemaking and wine-drinking companions in James and Chelsea. These joys quadrupled when he took on that most prized name of Nonno. In Nonno, our children found an enthusiastic playmate, an imaginative storyteller, a lullaby singer, a sideline spectator, a kindred spirit, and an inexhaustible love. Enzo also loved to play with language. He kept lists of unique Italian words and phrases on notepads and napkins all over the house. He memorized colorful expressions in French, Spanish, and Russian too, but he delighted most in the character of his native tongue. He shared this love for Italian conversation with a close circle of friends, the Circolo, whom he and Mom met weekly to discover the language more, and with whom they enjoyed treasured, meaningful relationships. Enzo proudly wore his Italian heritage like a colorful scarf you can't help but comment on. No matter where he went, people wanted to know about his accent, where he was from, and what his life was like. Even the briefest encounter with him might include a short lesson on winemaking, fine art, or Italian culture, enzymology, as we like to call it, a subject for which he was both expert and professor emeritus. He loved the quote by Giuseppe Verdi, "You may have the universe, if I may have Italy." With his eyes often cast toward the stars, his ears carefully attuned to the syncopations of nature, his hands rooted in the dirt of his fig trees, and his heart centered on his adoring family, if ever there were a man who deserves to dwell among the greats of heaven, it's him. Designing with Da Vinci, galaxy gazing with Galileo, waxing poetic with Whitman. He was the quintessential Renaissance man. His work was architecture, but his mind was philosophy. His voice was a melody. His words were poetry. His living was art. He was a masterpiece. Please raise your glasses with me to celebrate a life well lived and well loved.